Anyone else?
With the board, what's the process? So say a board was acting completely inappropriately, can a commissioner be put in? Is that sort of thing? Is that a process that would happen?
Yeah, there is an intervention framework that'll be in the legislation, but ultimately, I guess, as a first step, you, as an owning council, have the ability to intervene, and then beyond that, the government or the minister will have the powers to intervene also.
Cool. I've heard a little bit about software required for an entity. Is there a generic one that's been created by you guys or someone, or is it each council required to come up with their own software to manage their own entity, or each entity comes up with their own software program or process?
Yeah, it's probably more the latter. So I'll answer the question in two parts. We are not actively working on common platforms for water organisations to use. Part of the NTU work program under the previous Three Waters program worked towards a common platform. The, I guess, documentation and configurations of those platforms are still available to councils or water organisations if they choose to use them.
Yeah, pardon me for another school analogy, but working in a school and not having common platforms across school is just the most frustrating thing ever. And it would be great, I feel, if there was some sort of common platform that entities could use. And just another question. On your frequently asked questions website, there's, I'm understanding we're not at this point yet. It says, how do you recommend councils approach developing an individual or joint plan? Do you suggest populating the template on an individual basis first? So yes, as a first step, we recommend each council work through the plan template to understand their own position on financial sustainability. Is that what you were talking about, Joe?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So we're not at that point yet.
Well, I think it's
working through with your officers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit unfortunately worded. But what we don't mean is fill in a template and then decide whether you use it or not.
Yep.
It is review the template and the information components, identify there are any gaps, ensure that you can provide the information and the information disclosure,
Yep.
ensure you have a baseline 10-year financial projection of which to sort of run through the financial sustainability test, and where you feel quite confident that you would be able to stand behind if it was your plan, and do that quite quickly. So that then you've got another 9-10 months or whatever. You've always got a fallback position. You know you've got the information you need. You know what you would need to do to be financially sustainable if any of the models you were investigating weren't to proceed or weren't voted through by council or anything like that. So it's kind of the intention behind that. It's know your own position and your fallback position early to then have the confidence to just spend your time looking at what your options are.
So is that something that we should have before October 30th?
Can I just, because I think when we, to pick up on what Joe's saying for context, when we say work through the plan individually, it's actually just an exercise to develop the numbers that Joe's talking about. It does not mean that you need to submit an individual plan and a joint plan.
Yeah.
And it was, and you're in a slightly different situation here in the Wellington Wairarapa, where you've already got quite a lot of work going on, modelling what joint kind of arrangements might look like. Many other councils are not even at that stage. So we're kind of suggesting that, for the reasons that Joe's talking about in terms of understanding your own position, but also just to have a common methodology to be able to talk to other councils. So, we've written those FAQs for everybody, and different regions are in different places. And you're probably a little bit more advanced than a lot of those other regions in terms of the access to resources and the information you've got about joint arrangements.
Just add to that, round it up. What we're doing will help just fast forward through that.
You must be pleased people are reading them. You wrote them.
We're very pleased.
Well, I'm not sure that's even across the country either, to be honest.
Just average it out, everyone else.
Bex, and then David.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. My question is, you talk about financial sustainability, and part of that is being able to borrow or get work done. When the local water done well stuff first came out, a lot of the focus was on councils partnering with other councils. So my question is, if you can be financially sustainable alone, but you can be financially sustainable with other partners, what is the government more interested in? Partnering? Because if both models are financially sustainable.
Yeah,
Can I answer the first part of the first question, please?
Sure.
Just to address the why there was a strong focus on the regional cooperation versus the financing announcement. Sorry if you were going to do that.
Well, not
already.
versus, but it was still a
Yeah.
key driver.
So early on in the policy process, when new government changed, there was a National Party kind of manifesto document on local water done well. Our job was to repeal the old legislation, shut down the old program, and start to build out the policy framework, all in the space of kind of 3 or 4 months. It wasn't really until, when was it, the announcement? A few months ago, that we had landed this financing solution through our engagement with LGFA. So prior to having LGFA's financing solution, all we were looking at is really needing amalgamation in scale and size in order for an entity to be able to have a solid credit rating to be able to access financing. With the LGFA solution and the LGFA's commitments to enable the debts to be treated separately, that no longer becomes the driving force behind whether you can access the financing. It's the structural separation and having a separate board that does. So amalgamation doesn't drive it, the financing drives it, but it doesn't mean that we don't see value in amalgamating.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
Yep, thank you.
David?
can I just add
Sure.
one comment to that? Obviously, we have a statutory role to accept water service delivery plans, so our primary focus is on a plan being submitted that is financially sustainable, first and foremost. We also, I think, have an interest on behalf of ratepayers around the country that an optimal solution is adopted as well. So we would encourage any council who have joint models available to them to seriously consider those as opposed to standing alone.
Great, thank you.
My question's very simple. It's sort of been answered. Were you involved with Three Waters?
Yes, all three of us.
Thought you might have been,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
I won't ask any more.
Yes, we were all part of that, and
Yeah.
all part of building local water done well as
That's
well.
okay.
Yeah.
That's all right. I was going to ask you how it compares, but I won't.
Well, I mean, it has quite a number of sometimes subtle differences, but it's quite a different policy. I will say one thing in terms of the difference in policy. So, I guess Three Waters policy was focused on achieving balance sheet separation as a key way to, I guess, finance the investment required in infrastructure. Local Water Done Well does not require balance sheet separation because of the financing arrangement with LGFA. Essentially, where a rating agency or a financier treats the debt of the water organisation as being separate from the council. And essentially what it means is the water organisation can borrow more, which is appropriate for a utility type organisation, to, I guess, in our terms, address some of the infrastructure deficit, but also address affordability challenges.
And so from a policy perspective, that drove the governance arrangements that you saw in place that actually generally councils weren't very happy about, but it was to achieve that balance, that separation between council and the water services entities.
And ultimately, the councils have responsibility for it being sustainable, financially sustainable. And if it ends up being financially unsustainable, where do we go?
Yeah, well, there are a number of controls in place in the system that would prevent that. So obviously there's an accountability framework where the performance of the organisation is public. As owning councils, you have, I guess, the ability to monitor the performance of that organisation and require changes through the board. There are regulatory regimes, including water quality regulation as well as price quality regulation that the Commerce Commission will pick up. And then there are, there are also, I guess, lending financiers covenant monitoring. As a very interested party, LGFA will be monitoring the financial situation of the water organisation to make sure it doesn't deteriorate. And then if for some reason, some way, somehow, the organisation did start to indicate signs of financial distress with all of those controls in place, then there are, I guess, statutory interventions that would kick in to prevent that organisation from becoming insolvent.
And on that point, that question, would there be an obligation to report back to the council? You know, if there was, by the
There is.
that's looking into it.
Oh yes, as the owning council, absolutely, yes, yes.
So I can just provide a little bit more detail and practice of how that would kind of work. Whether you're setting up your own CCO or a joint CCO, you're kind of in the driver's seat as to how you do that with your shareholders agreement, rights and obligations. You'll set the contractual and other relationships between your council and the water organisation. There will be a guarantee in place, which is what gives LGFA comfort. The other main thing that gives LGFA comfort here is, you know, with the economic regulation coming, water services is quite different to other council business in that it's long-lived infrastructure, clear consumer, clear relationship in terms of use and paying for, and effectively a perpetual income stream for as long as you have people in town using your water services. So what they do is they lend against the revenue. So long as you stay within that, they're always comfortable that so long as you have the power to charge for water and you have a guarantee, a proportional guarantee in place from the council, which has the ability to rate and charge against households, that's a pretty big degree of comfort they can take on credit risk. Because ultimately, you should have the borrowing headroom to respond with debt rather than increasing prices quickly. And in an event of shock, you still have your CDM 60/40 cover. You'll still be able to move prices to the extent you need to rebalance things. But ultimately what you'll do is you'll go, here's our performance expectations to this organisation, and you might do that annually, biannually, triannually like the LTP, and you might say, this is the envelope that we're kind of expecting you. We want to see your strategy come back, and it's a budget, and it explains how you're managing your credit risk, what your investment upper limit is, what the maximum drawdown is going to be, and the maximum exposure to the council for the guarantee, because you guys will be constrained, not on balance sheet, but you should still be taking into account what the water entity is doing for you and what the contingent liability is when you're making your own other investment decisions.
So surely, you know, certainly from a board's perspective, it might not be, the focus might be on that financial sustainability. But from an elected member's perspective, we want that affordability concept.
Yep. Yes.
And so there will be negotiations around how much you can charge, which will then lead to negotiations around the length of the loan and the size of the loan. You keep prices down. Is that the sort of
Yeah,
stuff we're talking about?
you will have the power to set those principles and priorities at establishment, and you'll also have the ability to do that as an owning council through your statement of expectations. The Commerce Commission will also play a role in determining cost-reflective pricing so the organisation doesn't overcharge consumers as well.
Brett?
You've talked about the councils will be able to influence the aims and objectives, whatever, of the board with things like price management or not. How will the councils, are the rules set for that? I mean, just say that you had Wellington and South Wairarapa going together. Do they sit at the table with equal voice and equal vote when setting those rules or not?
That will ultimately be up to you, your advisors, to manage that process. So what I guess the government and DIA do is set the mechanism in legislation, but you have freedom to operate within that. So I guess we would see a water organisation requiring a constitution or a shareholders agreement, or both, and you would describe those matters within those documents. We will provide the sector template examples of those and things that should be considered in them, but ultimately it's your choice to use those and adopt them how you see fit.
So just say, talking just Wairarapa, where Masterton is 56% of the equation, population-wise, and you've got two other smaller ones. What's to stop, not that I'd suggest that we would be like that, but what's to stop the Masterton people dominating and getting a better deal than may otherwise have?
Well, again, I guess I would leave that to you to decide the particular approach that you take into those discussions.
Can I just add to that? So when Jared mentioned the further guidance and artefacts we'll be bringing out before Christmas, what we're trying to do is reduce the barriers and the hurdles you kind of see for establishing these things, because there's lots of legal things that need to get sorted out. So what we're going to do is create a number of artefacts that kind of 80% complete. A constitution or a shareholders arrangement will be one of them, but another one which you could consider is kind of like a binding agreement between councils towards progressing to finalise those documents. And at the time you negotiate that, you're all equal partners, right? So that would be the mechanism, and you should take advice from officers and professional advisors if required as to how best to advocate for your council in that process, because that'll set the rules of the game. But it's up to you guys and the councils you're talking to as to how you do that. There's shareholding ownership interests, there's residual asset interests, there's voting rights. They don't all necessarily have to be the same thing. You'll just need to kind of conversate with your neighbours and work out what are the bottom lines, and what are the things that you're really after.
I suppose one of the, it is what it is, I guess, but, in many agreements, I might say, well, we'll join with you, conditional on this, that and the other, but it sounds like we have to make the choice before we get to discuss the conditions.
Well, what we're hoping is that it economically doesn't matter too much. What we're hoping is that it economically doesn't matter too much what the outcome of those discussions are.
Why do you say that, and that, just to be absurd again, if South Wairarapa merged with Wellington, just those two,
Yeah.
I would assume that the Wellington price would be vastly, the economics would be much better than South Wairarapa's.
Well, it depends on analysis, right?
But
Okay.
We're not all even. Orowhenua or Kawhiti comes out as being much ahead of us in some ways in the short term. We are all different. How, those differences to some extent will influence your negotiations, but we don't get that option.
Well, I mean, it is within your gift, though, right, to determine your bottom lines when considering joint arrangements.
X.
One of the stumbling blocks, whichever partnerships you choose, is the establishment fees, set-up costs. Is there any chance at all that central government might assist with funding for that?
So the government have indicated that there wouldn't be any financial support for establishment costs. We, as a practical mechanism, see those as being, I guess, incurred as debt by the new water organisation.
What was the last bit, sorry?
Incurred as debt by the new water organisation.
Just thought I'd ask.
You might have a sponsor council in an arrangement once you've got a binding agreement or a shared cost arrangement where you might borrow or use rates to fund it to get refinanced out. There's no Crown money for this, but our view is you can set these things up for not incurring much cost, especially when they're not massive and complex things. It kind of depends on whether you're thinking that when you're establishing a new entity, it needs to look like what it's going to look like 10 years from now before you transfer the powers and arrangements, or whether you're incubating this thing over time and you're taking transitional steps as to what it needs at what point in time and when you kind of release the umbilical cord to it when it's ready and on its own feet. We think if you took a kind of a minimum viable product approach with some of the collateral and the agreements that we'll present, it doesn't take much. You've got the consultation requirements, set up a company, have a shareholders arrangement, have a bank account, have a line of credit and a guarantee. Beyond that, it's up to you guys to decide what in addition to that needs to be done before you set it up, then what needs to be done a year after, what needs to be done.
So you'll have a D-Day where the switch is flicked, right?
There will be eventually, but it could be a transitional thing, right? You might not move the assets straight away, you might not move the staff in straight away. It's really up to you guys to determine what the transitional arrangement is.
Yeah.
You have a full suite of contractual and structural options to do it. So we don't take a view, except we just want to enable and help you guys understand that and whatever the path of least resistance is.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a key difference with the Three Waters reform, where there was a date, there was a point in time when you just switched over. There is quite a expectation to be a lot more transition involved in a local waters done well kind of model, which may, as Joe's been saying, may actually be a model that is being established over time, or it may be in the discussion you've already had where you have a particular model and then you may join into a larger model, or so thinking about it in terms of transition is actually quite helpful, particularly in face of the first decision you make. You almost don't want to make it too complicated for yourselves, but you want to achieve your optimal outcome at that point in time, but not feeling that you're completely locked in to that forever. Just bearing in mind the costs of actually doing that work and the challenges of the sort of decision making around that.
Just speaking from experience, going back to the Three Waters question, it was very difficult for us to plan to move everything and have everything sorted on one day being an accounting balance date. There's no requirement from the government or the legislation for everything to get sorted at once. What we're interested in is a plan that sort of sets out what your intention is to do around water, can demonstrate that regardless of what happens, you're probably going to be financially sustainable by 30 June 2028, which is why we think that's where you start from where your own position is, and then it's just yours to design and roll out over time as you see fit. But that's why we sort of talk about starting with financial sustainability, so you know that regardless of what happens, you're not going to fall foul of your requirement to submit a plan. But beyond that, we don't.
I think that's really helpful because it's not something that we've actually talked about. It's kind of all seemed a bit, this has to happen by X, and really it's the choosing your partner or not with a sustainable plan, and here's our water service delivery plan, and then how we roll that out, we can work together with whoever we're choosing to work together.
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah, the two key dates are submitting a water service delivery plan by the 3rd of September 2025, and for that water service delivery plan to demonstrate financial sustainability by June 2028.
I was just going to, and what we're looking to see in that water service delivery plan is an implementation plan, but that can actually be a series of milestones around towards an establishment. It's not an establishment plan. It doesn't have to be completely locked down. I mean, what we'll be monitoring, I guess, beyond September 2025 is progress along the pathway of that implementation plan.
It's intent, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And we want to see details about partners, but we expect that implementation plans across the country will look quite different, and we'll have greater levels of detail or lesser levels of detail, depending on how progressed kind of those joint arrangements are in the main.
Yeah, thank you.
So it is intent done with a chief executive certification and a council resolution.
Intent and implementation.
Yeah.
Yep, sweet, thanks.
Sorry.
Yeah, just going back to Brent's question around establishing bottom lines. Jaron, did you say we should be doing that before we form an entity?
I'm just saying it's within your power to decide the sequence within which, that you take that on. So if that's important to you as a council to say, well, look, we'll consider a potential option, but it's on these terms, then, that's within your power as a council to decide.
Did I hear that right? And you can say we will join up with these 2 or 3 councils, provided these baselines, whatever, are adhered to. So it can be a conditional.
I think every council who works together towards a joint model will have expectations or particular priorities that they would want to bring to that partnership. And I think establishing those up front when considering joint models is very important to getting commitment to actually establishing a joint model.
But we're not sitting there being an arbitrator of the conditions.
That's right.
It is a discussion between you and your partners.
Okay, that's new sort of dimension. I didn't realise we could specify, which is a big difference.
But I would suggest the stuff is locked in well before you submit a plan.
Yes.
The stuff needs to be locked in well before you submit a plan. All right?
Yes,
So yes,
but the conditions can be decided in the next few weeks when we have to decide who to partner with.
Yeah, I think I'd look towards your council officers around, how you might handle that. But yes, if there are expectations that you have as a council that are contingent or that a potential joint model is contingent on, then I think it's important to establish those.
Yes, thank you. That has changed the day.
So much uncertainty that we've heard in all the questions that fielded. Have you heard of any councils that are deliberately not doing a plan and having one imposed upon them? Is that a strategy that anyone's thought about?
No, we haven't. I guess we have the benefit of working with councils right across the country. We have not encountered that particular circumstance.
What would a plan look like if that was to happen? Surely it would be a great plan because it would be developed by and with support from DIA.
Well, so there's an intervention framework that applies within the legislation. So there's a role called a Crown Facilitator that can be appointed either by the Minister or at a council's request. And that person has a role in making recommendations around primarily a joint arrangement. There's an intervention beyond that called a water service specialist.
Crown Water Specialist.
Crown Water Specialist, who has the powers more to just recommend. They can also binding resolutions. But, those are, I guess, interventions that would, particularly the latter one, that would primarily apply if, for example, a council did not submit a plan at all, and therefore we couldn't judge the sustainability of water service delivery, so therefore would need to take further steps to get clarity on that.
It would be quite brave of a council to put itself in that position because a Crown Water Specialist would come in and write the plan for them, and so that would impose obligations on them, and I guess there's the Part 10 sort of ministerial intervention powers still sit over the top of all of those things as well, so yeah, you probably wouldn't want to invite that intervention if you didn't need to.
Presumably that would be an interesting choice considering most local authorities rallied against Three Waters on the basis that they wanted to define their own destiny.
Yeah.
So to deliberately take the choice to hand it back, in effect, to central government.
And we are, exactly. And we are being really active in reaching out to councils and providing them with information, not letting anyone just sit there and wait till September 25 to find out that they're not going to submit a plan.
You guys available for questions after this, by phone?
Yes. Yeah, we've been working closely with Messina, so probably the easiest channel is through her.
Can I ask that all around the country we're grappling with the same thing, and I'm not trying to avoid going through our stuff. Could you put up, with your background, a list of water care analyses documents that everyone in New Zealand would find interesting? Because I hate the thought of 78 councillors getting their staff to go and find this and that,
Sure.
arguing about what's in and what's out. Whereas if you put it up, it might be quicker and just be a good idea.
Yeah.
Would you do that?
Yeah, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll have a look at that. So we have a DIA website, which I'm presuming is where Councillor looked at our FAQs. We're constantly updating that. I will go and look at the ATA website and look at the documents, and potentially we can link to those from the DIA site.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions, or are we done? All right. Thank you, guys.
Very
Thank you
much
for your time. And I think it's been really helpful to have you here and for our elected members to hear from you. So, kia ora for that. Shall we close with our karakia?
Ora, tā, te mutu